Right, the second part of the college sport, we're going to talk about some of the policy areas in the college sport. The text will actually cover a lot of different areas, but we're mainly going to focus on three main policies in college sport. First one is about eligibility. The second one is about Title IX, and the third one is about amateurizations. So we start with eligibilities first. So NCAA does introduce a lot of eligibilities rules to try to provide a fair competitions among all these college students. So eligibility rules basically refer to define who is eligible to play in the college sport. So basically, all the rules we can classify them into three different subcategories. The first one is initial eligibility. It's basically currently you're high school students. You want to become college athletes. You want to become D1, D2, and D3 athletes. So you want to know what will be the basic requirements for being a D1, D2, or D3 athletes. Right. So these are initial eligibilities. So after you start playing college sport, become a college student athletes. So NCAA has also introduced some rules to examine about these athletes' academic progress. Right, so this is the second type of rule. The third type is related to transfer. So if some students athlete want to transfer from one institution to another institution, whether they allow, what kind of impact they might associate with that. So the transfer, we actually spent a little time talking about it previously. So NCAA does not actually encourage athletes translate from one institution to another institution for playing sports. Right, so we're mainly going to focus on the first two rules. First one is initial eligibility. The second one is academic progress rules. As we look at the initial eligibilities, so NCAA actually introduced initial eligibility clearhouse. The purpose is to evaluate athletes' eligibilities. So if you're currently a high school students, you are playing high school sport, you hope one day you can become a college student athletes. So what will be the basic requirements? So this initial eligibility rules has been include the four part. First part is, of course, you have to graduate from high school, right? The second part is you have a minimum core GPA required. Third one, you have to attend the standard tests. You have to provide standard test scores, which is including ACT and SATs. And also you have to complete 16 core courses that are required by the NCAA, right? So those are the basic rules for these high school students athletes if they want to continue to play sports in colleges. So speaking of the code GPA and the ACT and SAT score. So NCAA is actually using the standard test scores and the GPAs considered together on sliding scales. For instance, if you have like a 3.3 GPA, your SAT score will be like 470s, right? But if you have a higher GPA, the requirement for the standard test score will be lower. So those are the relationship between the GPA in high schools and your standard test scores. So this is the first rule that related to the college sport, which is initial eligibility rule. Right. The second eligibility rules in the college sport related to your academic performance after you have enrolled in the colleges, and people want to know whether you are work hard enough, because NCAA mentioned now all the athletes, you are student athletes, right? You're student first and then you are athletes. So academic performance still very, very important. Also the most important for these colleges athletes. So NCAA introduced something called APR, which is academic progress rate. So for the APR score, so they require students athletes must take and achieve a passing grade for the specific numbers of the courses or maintain a specific GPA in order to maintain his eligibilities. So how has APR score has been calculated? They actually calculated by the team. So each student athletes, they will receive athletically related financial aid will earn 1 point if they stay in the school, and another point if they are being academically eligible. So basically, every student athletes will have 2 points. So 1 point for staying in school, and 1 point for being academically eligible. So if students meet with these both requirements, the students will get 2 points, right? But if students only meet one of the requirements, so either they're not eligible academically or they're not staying in the school, they can only get 1 point. If a student is not meeting those two requirements, so they will get 0 points. And then we calculate all those things together and divide it by the maximum points will be receiving by each of the particular team and time it by 1,000, and we get this APR score. So for the APR score, they say team must earn a 4-point average APR score of 930s in order to compete in the championships. So which means if the team, your APR score is below 930s, it's 930s, then you would not be able to compete at the national championship, although you already qualify for the national championships. So 930 is basically a passing grade for all the different teams. So the maximum point can be abated by the team is 1,000. So if a team is able to get APR score at 1,000, which means all the students athletes, they're not just staying in schools, but also they meet these academic requirements. Right, so Miami students athletes actually have a very, very strong APR score in the past. So in 2018, so the APR score among the Miami students athletes reached to 994, so very close to 1,000. Right, so this is APR score that has been utilized by the NCAA to examine whether the students athletes and also dedicates enough times to improve their academic performance on campus. So those are basic rules for the eligibilities in the college sports. The second rule we're going to talk about is related to the Title IX, which is a gender equality. I believe a lot of classes are covered about Title IX. So Title IX is a comprehensive federal law that prohibits discriminations on the basis of sex in any federal fund education programs and activities. So from the Title IX passed in 1970, early in the 1970s, right? So why do we need to have a Title IX? So the reason is because in the early 1970s, so women were facing a high levels of discriminations, especially in the educations of the higher learnings. So in some areas, so at that time, a lot of women applying for the colleges, but their applications got denied because the comment from the institution just say because you're women, so you cannot apply for the colleges. So that's why we will need laws like the Title IX can really enforce the rules to provide equal educational opportunity for not just male but also for women, for the equal opportunity for women. So in the Title IX, it indicate no person in the United States should, or on the basis of sex, be excluded from the participation in and be denied the benefit of or be subjected to discriminations under any education program, activity receiving federal financial assistance. So Title IX basically provide equal opportunities for women and giving women more opportunities aside education, not just about sports. For the NCAA, in order to encourage more women to participate in sports in college levels, NCAA does introduce Title IX rules. So NCAA's Title IX rules has been considered as a three-prong test. So three-prong test, which means you only need to meet one of the three requirement, you'll be considered the institution has complied with the Title IX. So we're going to spend a little time to explain each of the three-prong tests that we're talking about first. So the first test, they say, is called substantial proportionally. So they want the institution to provide intercollegiate participation opportunity for women's and men's and the race that are proportionally to their respective rates of the enrollments, and which means if a university we have a 50% male students and 50% of female students, so in the students athletes bodies, we also need to have the same proportion. We also need to have 50% of male students athletes and 50% of female students athletes. Right, so they say they allow the differences between this proportional is a 5%. So 3% to 5% gap is acceptable. So if you have a 50% of male students, 50% of female students in your student governing bodies, in your student athletes bodies, you could have for instance like 43% of the female and then 47% of the males. So those differences are 4%. So that is actually meet the requirements of the Title IX. So this is a gap acceptance is of 5%. It's very difficult for a lot of institutions to meet with this requirement. As you know, college sport, although it's like $1 billion sports industries, right? But most of the women's sports in college sport has not been considered as a revenue sport, right? Revenue sport in college sports are mainly in two sports: football and men's basketball, right? So other sports, Olympic-related sports, they don't really generate a lot of revenues. So it would be really difficult for athletic programs actually to introduce a lot of non-revenue sports since they're facing the pressures here. So this requirement, some universities meet these requirements, but majority of universities cannot really meet these requirements at all. So that's the first requirement, first test. Second test is about history and continuing practice of expansions. So to meet with this requirement, there are two different standards you can do. First thing is a school adding sport in the last 5 years. So basically schools adding women's sports in the last 5 years. And also school has increased participations for girls by 25%. So in here, increased participations for girls by 25%. It's not just talking about you are going to add women's sports. It's also talking about maybe women students, athletes, or women students participate some of the PE classes, or maybe participating in some of the club sports on campus, right? So those all has been considered as increased participations, right? So for this standard, initially a lot of schools were using these tests to indicate that they passed the Title IX test. Right, this is actually easy at the very beginning, but it's harder and harder because they require the school keep adding women's sports in the 5 years times. So it also going to become harder and harder for the school to actually meet this particular requirement. So the third test has been utilized by most of the institutions now to indicate that they meet with the Title IX requirement. So the third test is you need to have the accommodation of the interest and the abilities. So you basically, they say you have full and effective accommodation of the women's interest. So to meet with that, so there are multiple different things the university can do. So first thing, university will have to offer every teams for the underrepresented sex for which there is a significant interest, abilities for the visible teams. So obviously, they require, if you have a men's sports, you also need to have a women's sports, right? And second thing they can do is they can go and survey students about their interest. So for instance, you're going to survey about female students about, hey, what's your interest? What sport do you want to participate on campus? So after getting that survey, then you are able to offer these opportunities to allow women to participate in sport on campus, right? So this is also you can use that to indicate that you passed the Title IX test, and also you can have increase intramural participation rate, so giving women the more opportunity to participate in the PE classes, club sports on campus, which will also consider that you meet the Title IX, and also making sure that proportionally between female students athletes and male students athletes need to be higher than local high school participation rate. So the more women participate in college sports compared to more women participate in high school, which will also be considered that you meet with the requirements of the Title IX. So this is a three-prong test for the Title IX. So all the institutions every year they will have to complete a report indicate how they are able to comply with the Title IX. So that's our second policy in college sports. And the third policy we're going to talk about is about amateurization rule, which is the most debated topics in college sports. So the reason a lot of people would like to go and watch college sport is because people say, hey, since athletes, they compete for the love, not compete for the money. So amateurization has something to make college sport pretty unique for a very long period of time. If you look at NCAA's amateurization rule, they say the students athletes should be amateurs in intercollegiate sports, and their participation should be motivated by educations and by the physical and mental and social benefits to be drilled. So in the amateurization rule introduced by the NCAA, you can see basically, and they require students athletes, they cannot receive salaries for participating in sports, right? They would not allow athletes to try it out with the professional sports teams, right? They won't allow these athletes to be represented by the sports agents, and they won't allow these athletes to have a contract with the professional sports teams, right? So those are the requirements. Of course, they don't allow the students athlete to receive the prize monies for the competition as well. But the amateurization rules also have some exceptions. So if you are the Olympic athletes, you represent the United States, compete at the Olympic Games. If you're winning the medals, so a lot of time USOC or the USOPC right now, they will give you the prize money, right? You can take the prize monies though if you are American athletes compete at the Olympics. And this rule has also been applied for the international athletes if you compete at the Olympic, winning the medals and getting the reward. So the article that I want you to read, obviously they indicate Scotland as Singapore swimmers who won the first Olympic gold from Singapore at the 2016 Olympic Games. So he was giving about 1 million Singapore dollars by their governments for his achievements. So he was able to actually take that $1 million Singapore dollars as a prize monies. So this is amateurization rules. The rule has been introduced for many years, right? The concept has also been changed back and forth. So there's a lot of discussion about should student athletes being compensated or should be paid, right? So these are big topics. So should student athletes being paid? What do you think? So what's your opinions? I think everyone might have a very different opinion. Some people would say, well, student athletes should be paid, right? Because there are a couple of arguments that why student athletes should be paid. The one argument they would say, well, student athletes just like a full-time job, right? Athletes to have to go to weight room for early morning trainings, taking classes, and also participate in competition. So it's like a full-time job. They don't really have the time to do something else in addition to trainings and studies. So they should be paid just like a full-time employee. That's the fourth argument. So our second argument, they say, well, college sport is $1 million sports industries, right? They're making a lot of monies. So everyone making monies, right? Coach is making a lot of monies. Like Coach K, for instance, his annual salary is $9 million. And other football coaches, they're making like $5 million, right? So how couldn't student athletes being paid? Because they are the one who made the sports products, right? They are the one who produce entertainments, but they do not really being well compensated. So they say students athletes should just like employees, they should be compensated. So that's a second argument, right? The third argument, and also talking about universities has been using athletic achievement to promote schools and attract students. So students athletes also, their successes has been emphasized during these promotions. So they should be compensated. So there's people who go support the student athletes should be paid. And also a lot of people say, well, student athletes shouldn't be compensated, right? The first argument that we say is basically based on the amateurization rules, right? The reason people would like to go and watch college sport is because they're amateur athletes, right? If they got compensated, it will be very difficult to differentiate them from professional sports, right? So when they can compensate it, maybe students athlete will transfer from one school to another school. It will become very common. They may they may ask for the transfer fee. They may ask for transfer if they have the better offers that has been provided by other institutions. So that's no difference between college sport and professional sport, right? So maybe people will no longer going to watch college sport because it's not as pure as it looks before, right? So that's one argument. They also have another argument. They say, well, students athletes, if they got paid, they basically change the motivation of their studies in school, right? Students athletes, they're coming to college to study, to complete a degree. They're very likely that sports can help them to cover the costs that has been paid by the other normal students, right? So that's a second argument, right? The third argument, they say if students athletes receive pay salary, which means they will have to pay tax, right? Now they're receiving scholarship, they don't have to pay tax, right? But if you are receiving salary, you have to pay tax. Maybe the money that you will be receiving cannot really cover the tuition that you are supposed to be paid by the university, right? This argument, this study from the economics perspective, right? So this argument is also pretty interesting. And also the big concern is like college sport. Really few athletic departments actually making profit. Right? The study shows college only 24, 25 D1 schools actually making profit. If the student athlete got paid, just like how if they got paid, if the athletic department operated like a business, that means only these 23 or 24 schools they can pay their athletes, right? There's a lot of discussions about should student athlete be paid or not, right? So to understand about this, we try to look at two aspects. The first aspect is what does a pay means? Does a pay means should they receive scholarships, or the pay means can they receive endorsements, which means they can actually make revenues from their image and likeness, or they can receive salary. So there are three different levels here. So currently, all the students athletes, D1 athletes and D2 athletes, they are able to receive scholarships, right? So the first one is they receive scholarships. The second discussion is that can they make off the money from his image, right? For many years, NCAA prevent them from making off the monies from their own image and likeness, which is also result into a lot of legal discussions and lawsuits. So one of the really well-known examples is one of the really well-known examples was not that long ago, about 10 years ago, the Eddie O'Bannons, who was like a former basketball player for the UCLA. So he filed a lawsuit go against NCAA and EA Sports. So he was like an MVP of the national champions in 1995. So he found out his image has been utilized by EA in their college sports game, but he did not receive any money at all from that. So he filed a lawsuit go against NCAA and EA Sport. The result of the lawsuit is EA ended up paying the $40 million settlement to about 100,000 and students athletes. They have been appear on their video games. So can students athletes using that image make money off their image? Now it's a big legal big discussions, right? So these discussions reached the peak in 2019, right? The first one is in California. So at the end of September 2019, so Gavin Newsom, so is California's governor. So he signed the Fair Pay to Play Act. So basically, Fair Play to Pay Act allows student athletes to get paid for using their name and image and likeness, and also allow the student athlete to hire agents. So this lawsuit passed in California in the 2019 and will be started to take effect in 2023. Right, and after this lawsuit, and more states started to discuss whether we should allow student athletes to get paid. So Kevin Parker, the New York State senators, proposed to have a legislation that require all NCAA schools in New York to set aside 50% of their revenues from the athletic ticket sales and divide it among students athletes. Right, so more and more schools started to having that discussions. More and more states started having that discussion. Should we allow student athletes to pay? Right, NCAA and also respond to that at the end of the November. So NCAA at the end of October in the 2019. So NCAA is also for the first time they say we will discuss and we will have some sort of registration related to allowing athletes using getting pay of their image and the likeness. So this discussion will never be end. Will be keep continuing. It will be very interesting to see how what the new rule has been introduced by the NCAA and how they are able to address these most debated issues in the college sport for many years. Okay, this is the amateurization rule that we talk about today. So we talk about 3 different rules. The textbook actually cover more different rules in the college sport. So how you can take some time to read and understand a little bit about those rules and policies in college sport to see how this rule and policy adjust some issue, and maybe some of the issue can never be addressed at this point of times. So again, if you have any question, please email me and let me know your concern. And please do not forget to complete today's assignment as well. All right, that's it for today. I will see you guys next time.